Welcome to the special edition of Vantage. We are coming to you from the south of Italy, from the sleepy little town of Bari on the Adriatic coast. Some rain clouds welcomed us earlier today, but now it's slowly clearing up. Not what we expected from the European summer. But the weather aside, what are we doing here? Well, this sleepy region will soon become the nerve center of the world. Later this week, the most powerful leaders in the world will be meeting here for the G7 summit. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also been invited. This will be his first foreign trip after taking office in the third term. And we'll be covering all of it from ground zero. The agenda, the politics, the controversy, the security arrangements, and as always, a slice of Italy. So make sure you catch our coverage throughout this week. Tonight, we've got a packed show lined up for you. In the European parliamentary elections, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has emerged as the kingmaker. The United Nations Security Council has backed a proposal to end the Gaza war, but will it change anything? Prime Minister Modi has exchanged messages with former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, saying India has always stood for peace. And as the Maldivian President Mohamed Muizzu visits India, his country has decided to probe the previous government's agreements with New Delhi. American troops begin withdrawing from Niger in Africa. Apple has debuted its new Apple Intelligence, but it is powered by OpenAI. And why are bamboos destroying homes in the UK? All this and more coming up. The headlines first.
Malawi's vice president killed in a plane crash. The wreckage of the plane has been found. Yesterday, the aircraft went missing in bad weather. There were 10 people on board. Israel's parliament votes to revive a controversial bill to conscript ultra-Orthodox Jews. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has backed the move, but his defense minister has criticized it. The majority of Israeli Jewish men must serve in the military, but so far the ultra-Orthodox community has been exempt in favor of religious study. Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy facilities have destroyed half of its electricity generation capacity. That's the claim made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Russian strikes have caused severe energy shortages across Ukraine, leading to power outages and blackouts. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa won't attend this week's G7 summit in Italy. He is scrambling to find partners to form a coalition government. South Africa's new parliament will convene on Friday. Ramaphosa's party lost its majority for the first time since the end of apartheid in last month's election. North China bakes under a searing heat wave. An extreme heat warning has been issued for the capital, Beijing. China is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Scientists say that these gases are driving climate change and leading to heat waves.
We are in Bari in southern Italy. In the next few days, world leaders will start arriving here. They're coming to Apulia for the G7 summit. It's a gathering of some of the world's richest economies. The G7 is basically a group of Western elites. The members include Canada, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the host Italy. A total of 7 countries, hence the name G7. Now, their meeting comes at an interesting time, because Europe is seeing a political churn with a major election. America is heading to polls. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza continue, and Western economies are still bearing the brunt of it. So the G7 is trying to reinvent itself to show more inclusivity, also hoping to find solutions for some of the world's most pressing challenges. And Italy has put forward an ambitious agenda. It has spelled out some priorities, like the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, the G7's relationship with developing nations and emerging economies, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, and the advent of artificial intelligence. These are the key agenda items. Some European priorities have also been kept on the list. They are on Giorgia Meloni's mind, like illegal migration. The Italian Prime Minister will push the G7 to take a tougher stand on this issue, on illegal immigration. Expect her to engage from a position of strength.
I am ready to welcome and I am proud that this nation presents itself at the G7 in Europe with the strongest government of all.
So the agenda is diverse, as is the guest list. Beyond the G7 leaders, Italy has invited at least 12 other heads of state. And this is quite a significant number. Look at the tally of the previous hosts. Japan had invited 8 other countries, 8 countries apart from the G7 members. Before Japan, Germany and Britain had hosted this summit, and they had invited 5 countries each. Now, Italy has clearly surpassed them this time with 12. India's Prime Minister Modi is among the invitees. Prime Minister Modi is expected to arrive here on Friday, and this would be his first overseas trip in his third term as India's Prime Minister. Who else is invited? Brazil's President Lula da Silva, Argentina's President Javier Milei, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Jordan's King Abdullah. Also Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and this too would be a first. The first time a leader from Saudi Arabia will be visiting this summit. Never before has a leader from Saudi Arabia been invited to the G7. Also, a large contingent from Africa is expected to attend, so there could be several opportunities to build consensus, provided they can build consensus on which issues to focus on. And this is where the G7's differences start to show. Take the United States, for example. It is pushing for a $50 billion loan for Ukraine. Where will this money come from? Russian assets worth tens of billions of dollars have been frozen by the West. The US wants to use this money, frozen Russian assets in the West, for the loan to Ukraine. That's what America proposes. It wants the rest of the G7 to agree to this. So far, there is no consensus. Nonetheless, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been invited for this summit. And Moscow has been watching all of this. A few days back, Russia issued a warning to the West. It said, if the G7 goes ahead with this plan, Moscow will respond in kind.
We have the same opportunities. We have frozen money in EU accounts. We have assets. We also get income. If there is a decision, we will act similarly. We will respond in kind.
Then there is China. Last year, the G7 took a stand against Beijing. They called out China for its economic coercion. They pledged to take action to counter Chinese attempts to use its economic power and exploit vulnerabilities in trade ties. But the measures they announced were limited. In 2023, the G7 just agreed to share information. This year, there are calls to deal with the oversupply from China. The US and France are pushing for this. They want steep tariffs on Chinese imports. But for now, any punitive action appears unlikely. It will most probably be just a statement of condemnation. But Beijing is already pushing back.
The G7's hyping up of China's overcapacity and its attempts to impose restrictions on China's new energy products are a complete departure from the facts and economic laws, and are protectionism in nature, which are not in the interests of any party.
The summit begins on Thursday. The G7 may be trying to reinvent itself, but handling these differences will be the real test. We'll be tracking all of it from ground zero for you. Now let's look at the host of the G7, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. She emerged as a big winner yesterday in the Euro Parliament elections.
So we met here, it was almost 2 years ago, and it was a beautiful night. This one for me is even more beautiful than that of 2 years ago. So I want to say thank you to the majority of Italians who have continued to choose Brothers of Italy and the center-right.
Her party is called Brothers of Italy, and it will now have a much bigger say in the European Union. Let's compare the latest election to the last one, which was held in 2019. Both times, Giorgia Meloni has been part of a conservative coalition, the European Conservatives and Reformists Bloc, or the ECR. In the 2019 EU elections, the ECR got 62 seats out of 751, which is a bit more than 8%. This time around, they've increased their tally. Provisional results give the ECR 73 out of 720 seats. That's more than 10%. So Meloni's coalition has marginally increased its seat share. On the surface, these numbers do not seem like much, but that changes when you dig deeper. In 2019, Meloni's Brothers of Italy party won 10 seats. This time, it is projected to win 24 seats, and 24 seats is no joke. Because in the EU, that number can decide the president. Ursula von der Leyen is the current European Commission president. She's standing for re-election, and she has a tough task on her hands. The last time she secured the presidency by a mere 9 votes, just 9. Meloni will likely have 24 votes, which potentially makes her the kingmaker. Von der Leyen has suspected that this might be the case, so she refused to rule out working with Giorgia Meloni, and this is a huge shift for Europe. For years, the EU has been run by the centrists, who always went to the liberals for support, Liberals like the climate-friendly Green parties. But now the centrists must explore alternatives like Meloni and her ECR coalition. Von der Leyen is keeping her cards close to the chest for now. Her coalition says it won't seek a formal deal with Giorgia Meloni. But they could work together on a case-by-case basis. And that signals two things: von der Leyen's flexibility and Meloni's growing clout. Because even 5 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. Ursula von der Leyen allying with the Brothers of Italy, a party with fascist roots and once considered fringe and far right. But now von der Leyen says she might work with Meloni even if it's just on a case-by-case basis, and that's still an admission of Giorgia Meloni's clout. It boosts her legitimacy across Europe and at home in Italy.
It is a message that comes to us from Italians. Go ahead, go ahead. I take it as someone's message to say go ahead and do it, if possible with greater determination. A sign that I understand, a sign that I am ready to seize.
Stia diventando di nuovo un sistema bipolare. È una buona notizia.
Giorgia Meloni became Italy's Prime Minister in 2022. Her party had won about 26% of the vote. In this EU election, she won about 29%. It shows that more Italians trust her today. It's a sign of their confidence in her and a signal. Italians want Meloni to take her policies to the European stage. So whether she becomes a member of von der Leyen's coalition or she stays in the opposition benches, Giorgia Meloni will be speaking for Italy at the EU, and with her resounding mandate, everyone will have to stop and listen. And now on to the war in Gaza. The United Nations Security Council has done the impossible. It has backed a ceasefire deal. It has approved a resolution to end the war permanently. This is a first for the body in 8 months. 14 members voted for it. Russia abstained. So will this now end the war? It depends on Israel and Hamas, the parties fighting this war. Hamas has welcomed it. It has agreed to the ceasefire resolution. Meanwhile, Israel says it is committed to victory. So is this just another proposal that will change nothing in Gaza, or will this 8-month-long conflict finally come to an end? Our next report tells you.
The results of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 votes against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2735.
Finally, the UN Security Council has agreed on something. It has backed a ceasefire plan for Gaza.
Please raise their hand.
14 members backed the resolution. 1 member abstained. It was Russia. But the vote shows that there is a consensus. This is the first time the Security Council has endorsed a proposal to end the war.
To free all the hostages.
As President Biden made.
The ceasefire plan was proposed by the United States. It sets out conditions for a complete ceasefire, including release of hostages by Hamas, return of remains of dead hostages, and the exchange of Palestinian prisoners. It will happen in 3 phases. In the first phase, there will be a short-term ceasefire. Hostages and prisoners will be exchanged. In the second, Israeli forces will withdraw permanently from Gaza. And in the third phase, reconstruction of the Gaza Strip will begin.
It's time for this war to end.
So the plan sounds quite comprehensive. And now the United Nations has backed it too. But will it stop the conflict? That depends on the two stakeholders, Israel and Hamas. After the UN vote, Hamas welcomed the resolution. It has also accepted the proposal. Which brings us to Israel. The resolution states that it has accepted the proposal, but Israel hasn't said anything. Netanyahu has not endorsed it. It's an issue Russia raised during the vote.
Hamas is called upon to accept this so-called deal, but still, there is no clarity regarding an official agreement from Israel as is written in the resolution for the deal proposed by President Biden, given the many statements from Israel on the extension of the war until Hamas is completely defeated. So what specifically has Israel agreed to?
Antony Blinken may have the answer to that. The US Secretary of State is in Israel, his 8th trip to the region since the war began. He visited Cairo and Jerusalem, met with regional leaders, held talks with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, all to get the ceasefire deal in place. But Blinken's trip could not have come at a worse time. The top US diplomat has flown right into a political storm in Israel. On Sunday, War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz resigned, leaving Netanyahu's emergency government without a moderate voice. Netanyahu's far-right allies want this war to go on. They are not in favor of any ceasefire. If Netanyahu doesn't listen to them, they may withdraw support, which would mean his government would fall. So, while the UN may have backed a ceasefire proposal, there's a lot of ambiguity right now. Doubts over the language of the deal, no formal commitment yet from Israel, and the risk of Netanyahu's government collapsing. For now, the ceasefire deal is just the first step, but whether it will end the war in Gaza, we'll find out in the coming days.
Now let's talk about Pakistan. It may be trying to engage with India. Yesterday, Nawaz Sharif made a direct outreach to the Indian Prime Minister. He posted a message on social media congratulating Prime Minister Modi for assuming office for the 3rd time. In his message, Sharif said, "Let us replace hate with hope and seize the opportunity to shape the destiny of the 2 billion people of South Asia." Now, we don't need to spell it out. Sharif is signaling that the two sides should resume dialogue. That's what he wants. Within 2 hours, Prime Minister Modi responded. His statement was on expected lines. He said advancing the security of Indians will always remain a priority. And that's a reference to India's long-standing position vis-a-vis Pakistan that terror and talks cannot go together, especially after what happened this week. Jammu and Kashmir was attacked again. Terrorists struck a bus full of pilgrims in Riyasi. 9 people died in this attack. More than 30 others were injured. The attack came on the day when Prime Minister Modi and his cabinet took their oath of office. And the perpetrators are once again linked to Pakistan, an outfit affiliated with the Lashkar-e-Toiba. This is the same group that carried out the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. So there is no question of India reversing its policy at this moment. Prime Minister Modi got a message from Shehbaz Sharif as well. He is the Prime Minister of Pakistan and the younger brother of Nawaz Sharif. Both leaders kept their statements brief, sticking to just a one-line exchange. Earlier today, India's External Affairs Minister reiterated the government's position and policy on Pakistan.
और पाकिस्तान के साथ ये भी आप जानते हैं कि विषय जो है सालों से वो जो आतंकवाद का विषय जो है क्रॉस बॉर्डर टेररिज्म, हाउ डू वी फाइंड a solution to it so that cannot be the policy of a good neighbor.
So the outreach by the Sharifs is a non-starter. They've been at it for some time though. Around 2 weeks ago, Nawaz Sharif made a significant remark. He spoke about the 1999 Kargil War and how Pakistan was responsible for it. Sharif called the Kargil War a mistake on Pakistan's part, which was a major admission.
वाजपेयी साहब लाहौर तशरीफ लाए, याद है या नहीं याद है? याददाश्त कमजोर है ना आपकी? तो तशरीफ लाए और हमसे आके यहाँ पे मुआहदा किया. ये अलग बात है कि हमने मुआहदे की खिलाफ वर्जी की, उसमें हमारा कसूर है.
Before Sharif, his daughter Maryam Nawaz also made a case for dialogue. In the month of April, she said that neighbors shouldn't quote-unquote fight wars and that they should open the door of friendship. Prime Minister Modi has good reasons to not trust these overtures. When he took charge in the first term, he put his best foot forward. In 2014, he called Nawaz Sharif for his swearing-in. In 2015, he made a surprise stop in Lahore on Nawaz Sharif's birthday. Prime Minister Modi was on his way back from Afghanistan, and this was the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Pakistan in over a decade, in 2015. But the optimism was short-lived. India suffered a string of terrorist attacks in Jammu and Kashmir, first in 2016 when an Indian military base was struck in Uri, and then again in 2019 when a suicide bomber targeted Indian security forces in Pulwama. Today, bilateral relations remain in a deep freeze. Since 2019, both countries have not posted high commissioners in each other's capitals. They were withdrawn after India made the decision to abrogate Article 370. It withdrew the special status to Jammu and Kashmir. And that has been the situation since. It's been 5 years. Now, Pakistan's leaders say that they want to engage with India. But at the same time, Pakistan continues to provoke India. Here's another example of that. Over the weekend, Shehbaz Sharif was in Beijing. Pakistan and China released a joint statement on Kashmir. And what does it say? It says that the two countries oppose any unilateral actions in Kashmir. This was a challenge to India's rights over Jammu and Kashmir. It was a challenge to India's sovereignty, and India was quick to reject this joint statement. New Delhi said that Jammu and Kashmir remains an inalienable part of India. Today, India's foreign minister issued a more direct message. There can be no dialogue until Pakistan stops cross-border terrorism. Now let's look at the Maldives. India's neighbour keeps blowing hot and cold. This weekend, their president was in New Delhi. Mohammad Muizzu had come to India for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's swearing-in ceremony. He'd been invited by the government of India. It was an olive branch, a chance to reset fraying ties. Muizzu even sat next to Modi during a banquet at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And then he went on to meet Dr. S. Jaishankar, who's taken charge again as India's External Affairs Minister. Jaishankar said that he looked forward to India and the Maldives working together closely. It seemed like a reset was underway. But while Muizzu was in India, his political party was making its moves. One of Muizzu's party MPs launched an inquiry into 3 deals that Muizzu's predecessor had signed with India. The previous Maldivian government had signed with India. And what is the reason for this investigation? Muizzu's party says the deals, and I'm quoting, undermine the sovereignty and independence of the Maldives. So while President Muizzu was being treated like an honored guest in New Delhi, his party was busy painting India as the enemy in Mali. They were back to peddling their anti-India and India out narrative while Muizzu was in India. So what are these deals that they want to investigate? The first one is the Hydrographic Survey Agreement. It was signed in 2019 when Prime Minister Modi visited the Maldives. The deal was to help survey the country's territorial waters. This would help keep maps up to date, aiding in navigation and keeping the Maldives safe. The joint surveys have been taking place for the past 5 years. 944 square kilometers of the ocean have been mapped. And this includes regions that have not been surveyed since 1853. This has helped the Maldives bring its navigational charts up to date. But now President Muizzu and his party are against it. They in fact never liked the plan. They believe that it was a plot, a way for India to monitor the Maldives. So after he came to power, Muizzu decided to undo the agreement. He allowed it to run till the 7th of June this year. That's when the survey deal was to expire, the 7th of June. And now Muizzu has refused to renew it. And now this deal is under scrutiny. The second deal under the scanner is a dockyard project. India had agreed to develop, support and maintain a Coast Guard harbour for the Maldives National Defence Force. The deal was signed in 2021 when S. Jaishankar visited Mali. The deal was long in the works. The Maldives had raised the request back in 2013 and then again in 2015 and 2016. It took years to iron out the specifics of this harbour deal, but now Muizzu's party is looking to discredit it. The third Indo-Maldivian pact under scrutiny is the Dornier deal. In the year 2020, India gave the Maldives an aircraft. The Indian Navy sent a Dornier maritime surveillance aircraft. This was for rescue and relief missions. Now, normally this would have been celebrated, but Muizzu's party found an issue with this too. No one in the Maldives knew how to fly the Dornier, so India sent soldiers, some 80 of them, to operate and maintain the Dornier and other rescue aircraft. But Muizzu only saw Indian troops on Maldivian soil, not the context behind their presence. And he made the troop deployment a rallying cry for his India Out campaign. The rescue personnel became the Indians that Muizzu wanted out. Well, they are out now. All the Indian soldiers left the Maldives last month. They were replaced with civilians. But now no one knows how to fly the Dornier, and it is lying idle. Even though the matter is now closed, Muizzu's party does not want to let it rest. The Dornier deal is part of this new inquiry. So why is Muizu's party doing all of this now, when a reset of ties was so close? Well, it may be about domestic politics. Look at the MP's tweet again. He's going after the previous president, Ibrahim Soli, the previous Maldivian president. Muizu's party wants to corner Soli and the previous government by saying that they worked against Maldivian interests. The Indian deals seem to be an excuse. Collateral damage in the domestic politics. But even if India is not the direct target, this new incident leaves a bitter aftertaste, because India extended its arm in friendship, and Muizu's Maldives has chosen to slap it away. Let's now turn to the other Indian neighbour, that is Bhutan. The country's Prime Minister was in India to attend the oath-taking ceremony of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Earlier this week, we sat down with Shering Togbe. We asked him about his expectations from Prime Minister Modi's third term, the Bhutan-India relationship and how India can boost its neighbourhood-first policy. We also asked him if India is drifting away from its neighbours. What was his perception? Listen to what he had to say. Prime Minister of Bhutan, Shering Togbe, welcome to Firstpost.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Delighted to be here. Delighted to be with you.
Thanks. You attended Prime Minister Modi's third swearing-in ceremony. How was it?
It was grand. It was a celebration of hope. There's a lot of optimism. It was palpable. I was honored to be there. This is my second time. I was here in 2014, also during a swearing-in ceremony. And it's such an honor to represent His Majesty the King and the people of Bhutan at this very important and momentous occasion.
What are your expectations from Narendra Modi in his third term as India's Prime Minister?
My expectations? Well, you look at Modi 1.0 and then you see Modi 2.0, and looking at the track record, you can, I think, confidently say that 3.0, Modi 3.0 is going to be bigger and better. I think you're going to enjoy increasing returns. This is going to be a demonstration of the law of increasing returns. For Bhutan, I can very confidently say that our relations, which are already strong, are going to emerge even stronger under the new government and under Prime Minister Modi for his third term. For the region, I think there's a lot of room for optimism also. And if you extend it further, the global south is going to benefit with Prime Minister Modi as the leader of India.
In the last 10 years that he's been Prime Minister, how has the India-Bhutan relationship in particular evolved according to you?
Well, it's grown from strength to strength. India-Bhutan relations are unique, are special in that the relations have always been strong, based on trust and understanding and mutual respect. But in the last 10 years, I can say with confidence that it has gone up to even higher levels, and I am honored. I've been very fortunate to play a small role in that.
Even the best of relationships have ups and downs and challenges. What are the challenges of this one?
Well, the challenge is we need to be mindful. India is growing very rapidly. And we need to be mindful that we need to also work hard and ensure on the one hand that we benefit from India's inevitable growth, but we also stay relevant. And we've got to make sure that we continue to nurture the relationship. It cannot be nurtured by one part alone. And India and Prime Minister Modi ji is doing a lot to nurture our relations. So we've got to do a bit.
Bhutan is betting big on the Gyelephu Mindfulness City, which is a very ambitious smart city project. And I understand that you're also looking at some sort of Indian investment there. What is it that makes this particular project stand out? How is it different from other such initiatives?
Well, we are not betting on the Mindfulness City project. The Mindfulness City, the Gyelephu Mindfulness City, is a royal vision. It's a vision of His Majesty the King. And when His Majesty the King starts something, There's a lot of thought that goes into it, a lot of consultation that goes into it. And when we begin the journey, we have always reached our destination. So in that sense, it's not a bet. How is it different from other initiatives of this type? Well, there are many cities around the world, new cities, but many of, and all of them will serve a purpose. They are also intended for the greater good. But that said, I do believe that many of the cities, their development will eventually be taken over by market forces, because that is the way most of our countries operate also. This city is based on the ideals and principles of cross-national happiness. Technology will not be an end. Economic growth will not be an end. They will be a means to better living among people and better living in harmony among people, but also people with Mother Nature.
You mentioned gross national happiness. That's a concept that Bhutan has championed and the world is trying to learn from it. But I understand that there have been economic challenges as well. Has that shaken your trust in the system?
No. Firstly, Palki, Bhutan has not championed gross national happiness. Gross national happiness is a development philosophy that we believe in and we implement for ourselves. So we are not a champion as such. Gross national happiness has succeeded beyond our wildest dreams and expectations. I remember that just a generation ago, my parents, they grew up in a society that was literally medieval. And within one generation, almost every child who is in school, who should be in school, is in school. Literacy rates are very high. Life expectancy rates have reached unprecedented levels. And all this because of free education, free healthcare, while also protecting our culture and preserving our environment. And the kicker is that we have a democracy that is vibrant, robust, and that has been imposed by our kings, not demanded by the people. So these are results of the fruits of gross national happiness. One of the fruits is economic growth also. Economic growth is very important, but it must be balanced with social progress and culture, environment, and good governance. In the area of economic growth also, we've enjoyed a slow progress. Our economy is largely equitably distributed, and it is still very environmentally sustainable. However, economic growth has not kept pace with social progress. And as a result, yes, there is unemployment. Our children, many of our youth are seeking for better opportunities abroad. And so we know we've got to do a lot more. I know that I have my work cut out in developing our economy and developing our economy while also being mindful and true to the values and ideals of GNH.
I think the world is learning from Bhutan on how it's important to balance the two. Coming back to the relationship with India, when Prime Minister Modi took over in his first term in 2014, Bhutan was the first country that he visited. And as he wrapped up his second term, Bhutan was the last country that he visited, and that too in the middle of the election season. And that shows New Delhi's commitment to this relationship. How much of a difference does this sort of a personal outreach and touch make to equations between two countries?
It's important, but what's more important is to understand and to acknowledge why Bhutan, why the neighborhood. India is assuming its rightful place as a world leader, yet Prime Minister Modi has repeatedly shown that the neighborhood matters, and that as far as Bhutan is concerned, Bhutan matters very much. It was a huge honor to receive him on his first overseas trip outside India in his first stint as Prime Minister. And then in his second tenure, his last visit was also to Bhutan. And on our part, well, ministers and prime ministers visit India frequently, but significantly, His Majesty the King visits India. And this has led to even stronger relations between the two countries. This is what nurturing friendship is all about.
But there is a perception that India is drifting away from its neighbors. Do you share that perception, or do you think it's exaggerated?
Yes and no. If there is a perception that India is, you said, growing away, possibly economically. Economically, India has grown very quickly. By now, it should have been a $5 trillion economy had it not been for COVID. Had it not been for COVID, India would be the third largest economy in the world already, a $5 trillion economy. But it's going to get to $5 trillion really soon, and then you are well on your way to a $30 trillion economy. The question is, what about the neighbors? Are we going to progress with India? And that's the second part of the question. India has always been mindful of its neighbors. Prime Minister Modi has made absolutely has said his focus is on the neighborhood first policy. And this is why during his swearing in 2014, the neighborhood was here. 2019, the neighborhood was here. Yesterday, the 2024, the neighborhood is here, and I can see this continuing. But it's not just during the swearing in. I mean, India hosts the BRICS summit and invites the neighborhood. I was here. India hosts G20, invites the neighborhood. So it's very, very clear, and it's very established time and time again that for the Indian government, and in particular Prime Minister Modi, the neighborhood matters, and matters a great deal.
If there were three things that India and Bhutan should be working on urgently under the new government, what would those be, according to you?
With India and Bhutan, we have already a lot on our plate. And Prime Minister Modi, when he visited Bhutan just barely 2.5 months ago, he announced a range of initiatives, including an economic stimulus package to the tune of 1,500 crores, and then also assistance for a 13th five-year plan that begins later this month. At the end of June, it'll begin. And the assistance we are receiving is 8,500 crores. Added to that, we have hydropower corporation, and then Prime Minister Modi has given his full support to the Gelifu Mindfulness City, and we have a lot to do together. So in terms of investment, I would like to work a lot more with Indian investors to see how we can partner, and like I said earlier, to ensure that we also do our own part to grow while India grows. We don't want to be left behind. The other area where we need to pay special attention on is climate change. Now, obviously that India and Bhutan can't do, but India can play a leadership role globally. In the region, yes, but also globally in fighting climate change. The third area I think is critical, is very important for the region, is UN reforms and India's assumption of a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. I think that's very important. I've called for UN reforms and India's membership to the UN Security Council as a permanent member on 2 occasions at the General Assembly. But I think that we actually do need a strategy in the region, because this will benefit not just India but the region. So these are the 3 things I would focus on.
So you mentioned climate change, and you mentioned that India can do a lot more on climate change. How do you assess India's contribution so far? Because Prime Minister Modi has worked on the Solar Alliance and so on and so forth. Of course, as a developing country, we can do a lot more. But as a net zero emissions country, what would your advice be to India and the world?
We are not net zero, we are net negative. Yeah? And we don't have any advice, but India has done so much. Firstly, in terms of solar energy and renewable energy, India is a champion, a role model, an example to the world. And now the push to electric vehicles. And I can see a transition to green energy happening very soon. So I think that India has done a lot, and I think will do a lot more. Vis-a-vis Bhutan, economically, our biggest partnership is in the area of hydropower. All our hydropower is green. It is eventually green energy from fast-flowing rivers, sustainable rivers. And our cooperation is mainly in that field economically. And the amount of energy we generate is big in Bhutanese terms, but it can get and will get a lot bigger. And that's going to generate a lot of green energy for use in Bhutan and in India.
Right. I have a lot of questions, but I think we'll take it in the second conversation because I understand that you have very limited time and a packed schedule. So thank you very much, Prime Minister.
Second conversation?
Yes.
In Bhutan.
I look forward to that. Thank you for your time and insights.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best. Now we turn our attention to Africa, to Niger in the west, where an exodus is taking place. An exodus of US military personnel. About 1,000 American troops are in Niger. They were deployed to combat terrorism. This country has been hit by a terror insurgency. The previous government was trying to counter it with the help of French and American soldiers. But a coup took place in Niger last year. The junta ousted the French as soon as they took power. But they let the Americans stay for a while. Now it seems that the junta is done with the US as well. Niger and the US negotiated a withdrawal deal last month. The US has till September to leave. So the soldiers have begun packing up. Here's our report.
A few days ago, there was a ceremony in Niger, a relatively somber procession. There were just soldiers in attendance, troops from two countries, the home nation, Niger, and US military personnel. The troops gathered around an aircraft, an American military transportation plane, a C-17 Globemaster III. The troops had gathered around the aircraft to watch it depart.
The June 7th flight of the U.S. Air Force's C-17 Globemaster III from Niamey Air Force Base 101 marks the start of a series of wide-body aircraft rotations to repatriate personnel and equipment in accordance with the May 19, 2024 agreement. Since the agreement on the withdrawal of U.S. troops was signed on May 19, 2024, more than 269 of the 946 troops and several tons of equipment have already left Niger.
The US military is on the clock. They have to leave Niger by September 15th. That means the US has about 3 months. 3 months to pack up all their equipment and make their way out of Niger. It won't be easy, because the US has invested a lot in Niger's defensive capabilities over the years. The Americans were using two air bases in Niger, called Airbase 101 and Airbase 201. 101 was a common base, shared by the Americans and the French. It's located in Niger's capital, Niamey. The US was initially using this for its aerial counter-terrorism operations. But a few years ago, Washington decided it needed a new location, a base closer to the terrorists. So between 2016 and 2019, they built another base, Airbase 201. It's located near the city of Agadez. The base was specialized for MQ-9 Reaper drones. The Americans built the base at a cost of over $100 million, but now they have to dismantle it, take it apart and ship out the pieces, or risk their equipment falling into enemy hands. The US has experienced this already, when it withdrew its forces from Afghanistan. The Taliban now use the American weapons and vehicles left behind. The US has 3 months to avoid a similar scenario in Niger. But this time, it won't be militants who'll take over the equipment. It might be the Russians. Russian soldiers are already in Airbase 101, the base in Niger's capital Niamey. After the Americans leave, the Russians will be free to use Airbase 201 as well. Considering the current hostilities between the two nations, it would be a loss of face for the US if Russian troops got hold of American equipment. Niger is trying to soften this blow.
Finally, the two parties reiterate that this withdrawal of American forces will have no impact on current relations between the Republic of Niger and the United States of America.
The junta claims there are no hard feelings. It's all business. It has just gone a different way, opting for assistance from Russia instead of the West. Niger has every right to do that, of course. It's a sovereign nation that is entitled to pick its partners. But the withdrawal paints the US in a poor light. It wasn't allowed to stay, despite having spent millions on Niger's defense. That is a failure of US diplomacy. And it shows that America's clout around the world has started to shrink.
We all have that friend who's always fashionably late to every party. In the world of technology, that could be Apple. It's finally joined the AI race, unveiling Apple Intelligence. It means new apps, AI features, and an AI-powered Siri. But the important update here is that Apple's AI revolution will be powered by OpenAI, the same company that made ChatGPT. It sounds like a great partnership, but not everyone is happy about it, including Elon Musk. He says this is a massive threat to data security. But is it really? Our next report tells you.
The world of artificial intelligence is fast-paced and cutthroat. If you can't keep up, you're out. So for months, Apple found itself in an uncharacteristic position. The trendsetter of the techverse was lagging behind. As Microsoft, Google and Amazon galloped ahead, Apple found itself trotting along. The company was busy polishing old iPhones into new models instead of diving into the murky waters of machine learning. But not anymore. Apple has finally joined the AI race. And they're not just dipping their toes in the water, they're doing a full cannonball.
Apple Intelligence is the personal intelligence system that puts powerful generative models right at the core of your iPhone, iPad, and Mac. It draws on your personal context to give you intelligence that's most helpful and relevant for you.
In Apple, AI stands for Apple Intelligence. It envisions a future where the AI system knows all about you, can use that knowledge to get information, and in turn takes action on your behalf. Essential to this plan is Siri, Apple's virtual assistant. When Siri was first introduced, it was revolutionary. But now it feels more like a relic from a bygone era. For years, it has been outclassed by Alexa and Google Assistant, relegated to just setting timers and alarms. But Siri is now making a comeback. It will have the ability to answer questions using what's on your screen and the knowledge from across various applications.
For example, you'll be able to say, "Show me my photos of Stacy in New York wearing her pink coat." And Siri will bring those right up. Then you might say, "Make this photo pop," and Siri will enhance it, just like that.
But the piece de resistance of Apple's AI comeback is their newly minted partnership with OpenAI. Yes, the same OpenAI that powers ChatGPT. It will now power Apple's AI revolution. But the move hasn't come without some backlash, especially from Elon Musk. He says it's a threat to data security and has threatened to ban iPhones at his companies. Musk fears that Apple is compromising its data privacy to get ahead in the AI race. But is that truly the case? Well, not really. Apple says that privacy is still a top priority for the company. So how will it work with OpenAI then? It's quite simple. When ChatGPT is given an Apple query, the information will pass on to OpenAI, but Apple will ask for the user's permission. It also says OpenAI can't store the data or train its systems on it.
Your data is never stored or made accessible to Apple. It's used exclusively to fulfill your request. And just like your iPhone, independent experts can inspect the code that runs on these servers to verify this privacy promise.
So brand new updates, an AI-powered Siri, and all without jeopardizing user privacy. It sounds great. So what's the catch? In classic Apple fashion, the new AI features will have limited backwards compatibility. In layman's terms, this means that to enjoy the new features, you'll need to buy a new iPhone. What happens to your old, perfectly functional iPhone? Well, it's as good as gone. It's a strategy as old as time, or at least as old as the iPhone. And Apple seems to have mastered it. They're diving headfirst into the world of AI with a plan that's part genius, part marketing fluff, and entirely Apple. While Tim Cook and company may have joined the AI race late, don't rule them out just yet.
Our last story tonight is about bamboo. It's a valuable plant. It can stabilize steep slopes and cut erosion. It can be burned for fuel, eaten as food, or turned into furniture. Bamboo is reliable and versatile, but in the UK, it is a nuisance. More than a century ago, bamboos were imported to Britain as exotic ornamental treasures. But today, the same treasures are causing trouble for the Britons. Alien shoots are rising from the soil, punching through plaster walls, colonizing the floor beds, and leaving people with legal disputes and hefty bills. So how did it get so bad? Can Britain win this fight against the invasive species? Here's a report.
About a decade ago, when British homeowner Stephen Neville planted bamboo in his garden, he didn't know the monster he was creating. Neville only intended to divide his fence, but as the plant grew, it did so much more. The bamboo's tendrils snaked their way through the garden, into his patio, and even his neighbor's lawn. In 2022, when Neville returned after a family holiday, he saw this. The plant had invaded his kitchen as well. It was growing out of his oven. Nowhere seemed off limits for this bizarre bamboo, and Neville was left with no choice but to spend £6,000 to get rid of the plant completely. That's about $7,600. And Neville is hardly the only one left bamboozled. Bamboos have become a growing problem for the UK. They are striking fear into the hearts of homeowners, punching through plaster walls, rising like spears from the soil, and shooting up from asphalt. These alien shoots are not just horrifying, they're leaving many with astonishing bills or bitter disputes with their neighbors. But before we discuss this, let's get to the root of the bamboo problem. How did it start? The tale begins more than a century ago, when bamboos were imported to the UK as exotic ornamental treasures. By the late 1990s, they were in peak fashion thanks to television. The problem is, there are about 1,600 species of bamboo. But due to a dearth of awareness, the wrong invasive species were imported. Then planted clumsily. Soon they were dominating any plant life they encountered. And they only got tougher. They adapted quickly, even to climate change. Warmer soil only boosted their growth, and soon enough bamboos were multiplying rapidly and turning into a headache for the British. Most Britons were caught off guard. According to a survey, about 1/5 of Britons have bamboo or live next to someone who has it. But 71% of the Britons are not aware that bamboo can cause damage. 84% don't know that it can prompt legal battles. Now, legally speaking, there are no restrictions on planting bamboo. There are no legal requirements to declare its presence while selling a house either. Because bamboo is not legally classified as an invasive species in Britain. Unlike, let's say, Japanese knotweed. Yet, many say that bamboo is the new knotweed, and it's leaving people in knots. When bamboo damages or encroaches on a neighbor's land, this could be grounds for legal proceedings. Plus, the damage can be costly. In 2019, destroying a vast web of bamboo roots cost a homeowner more than £100,000 or $127,000. So if you're planning to get a bamboo, do your research. Understand the kind of bamboo you want. Ideally, it'll be the clumping bamboos which tend to grow upwards instead of the running bamboos. These are best avoided. Their roots grow horizontally and colonize the ground, creating their own little forest. That being said, for now, people are being urged to avoid planting bamboo altogether. The British hope that this solves their colonizing bamboo crisis. After all, for once, they are paying a heavy price for taking what doesn't belong to them.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Brazil, wetlands are burning as wildfire consumes the world's largest tropical wetland. In Mexico, thousands of dead fish have blanketed the surface of a lagoon amid an intense drought. In China, a rare scale-shaped tidal wave was spotted on a river. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1955, the world witnessed the deadliest crash in motor racing history. 3 cars crashed on a racetrack in France. They plowed into the spectators' grandstand. 83 people were killed and more than 100 were injured. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow from Bari.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.